So this is about the Vicksburg Massacre of 1874. We ran out of time on our Sunday show, so I did not have time to get to this. And this is from, this piece here comes from the Zen Education Project, okay? And I talked about this in my class on Sunday, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. But the Vicksburg Massacre also ties into domestic terrorism inflicted upon African Americans to keep us from voting. Okay, this is also connected to this as well. All right. So if we look at this piece here, and I'm going to pull up a slide here from the class as well. If we look at this, this involves a duly elected African American sheriff named Peter Crosby, who was forced out of office. Okay, physically forced out of office by white supremacists, the White League in Mississippi. So let me go here to let's pull this up here. All right. So the Vicksburg Massacre of 1874 in Vicksburg, Mississippi. On December 7th, 1874, the Reconstruction era Vicksburg Massacre occurred in Mississippi, with estimates ranging from 75 to 300 African Americans killed. You had whites who attacked African American citizens who had organized to defend Peter Crosby. Peter Crosby was a duly elected African American sheriff who was a former slave, and he was a veteran of the Union Army. Peter Crosby had been forced to resign from his elected role as sheriff. Peter Crosby had been forced to resign from his elected role as sheriff. All right. If we look at this piece here from the Zen Education Project, they have an excerpt about the Vicksburg Massacre, which comes from the book A Nation Under Our Feet: Black Political Struggles in the Rural South from Slavery to the Great Migration, from historian Stephen Hahn. And it says, more important was the emergence of the White League and the White Line movement more generally in Louisiana, Mississippi. So the White League is another domestic terrorist organization like the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan was not the only one. You have the Knights of the White Camellia, you have the White League, you have a number of different domestic terrorist organizations. They were committed to drawing the racial line in politics and inviting all white men, without regard to former party affiliations, to unite. They invited all white men without regard to party affiliations to unite. The League was first organized in Opelousas, Louisiana in late April of 1874, and then spread very rapidly. We also talked about the Opelousas Massacre of 1868, which was involving politics and voting as well. Okay. Opelousas Massacre of 1868 in Opelousas, Louisiana. Now, it clearly built on foundations established, the White League and the White Line, clearly built on foundations established by the Ku Klux Klan and the Knights of the White Camellia. A Union Army commander regarded the White League as a second edition of the White Camellia campaign of 1868, but was even more directly aligned with the Democratic Party at the time. Indeed, leagues were often little more than local Democratic clubs converted into paramilitary companies. If the quote, if the Democratic Party is arrayed against the Negro and the Republicans, the Opelousas Courier proclaimed, the newspaper there, the Opelousas Courier, quote, it becomes a white league and no one can object to its efficient organization, end quote. Now, white leaguers surely recognized that the federal government was losing interest in interfering in Southern politics and sustaining Republican regimes by military means. And as Reconstruction goes into the mid 1870s, you have a declining interest and a declining commitment from Republicans to interfere in the South when it comes to massacres, when it comes to protecting the rights of African Americans. Okay, you have a declining interest from Republicans when it comes to interfering in incidences in the South. But they also responded to the growing assertiveness of African Americans within the Republican Party, which showed itself in the rising incidence of Black office holding. Because there's about 2,000 African Americans who got African American men who were elected into public office in during Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. Okay, there's about 2,000 of them. Now, by that time, too, white line counterparts in Vicksburg, Mississippi, had demonstrated how paramilitary mobilization and, quote, very definite intimidation could bring electoral success even where Black voters held decided numerical sway. Because keep in mind, during Reconstruction, African Americans were the majority of the voters, okay, in Mississippi. So if anything still held back a full-scale white paramilitary offensive, it was removed in the November 1874 elections. Congressional Democrats won control of the House of Representatives for the first time since the Southern slaveholders had rebelled against the U.S. government. So what happened was there was a 1873, there was a economic crisis, okay, the Panic of 1873. There was an economic crisis. There was an economic depression. In the midterm elections of 1874, Democrats win back control of the House of Representatives for the first time since they seceded from the Union in 1861. Okay, for the first time since they seceded from the Union and the Civil War, Democrats win back control of the House of Representatives because there is a declining desire to intervene in the South on behalf of African Americans. In Vicksburg, Mississippi, white liners seemed to commemorate the event. White liners seemed to commemorate the event by moving quickly to complete the work they had begun in the summer. Okay, taking back control of the House of Representatives. Okay, the Democrats. This time they focused on the country, on the county, rather than the municipal government, which was almost wholly dominated by Black Republicans, including the sheriff, Peter Crosby, a native Mississippian who had served in the Union Army during the war. Okay. Now, meeting in early December of 1874, they demanded the resignations of all of the black officials and pressured Sheriff Peter Crosby to yield under, hold on just a second here. Okay, so they demanded the resignations of all of the black officials and pressured Peter Crosby to yield under what he regarded as a threat of assassination. Okay, they have a typo. It's not threat, it's threat of assassination. Peter Crosby then headed to the state capitol for help. So the governor at the time is Governor Adelbert Ames. Here's a picture of Governor Adelbert Ames, okay, governor of Mississippi. He was a Republican governor, okay? Republican Governor Adelbert Ames of the party's radical faction, the Radical Republicans, who were advocating for the rights of African Americans. Governor Ames turned a sympathetic ear to Peter Crosby. He ordered the riotous and disorderly persons who had, quote, expelled from office the legally elected sheriff, who had expelled from office the legally elected sheriff. Governor Adelbert Ames ordered them to disperse and retire peaceably and, quote, submit to the legally constituted authorities. Governor Ames also instructed the Warren County Militia Company to cooperate with Sheriff Peter Crosby's effort to regain office and suppress the mob. And Governor Ames suggested that Sheriff Peter Crosby should summon a posse for further assistance. Now, Governor Adelbert Ames' orders did little to change the behavior or temper of the white supremacists in Vicksburg, Mississippi. But Sheriff Peter Crosby called for a posse. But Sheriff Peter Crosby's call for a posse revealed a strong foundation of loyalty and organizational readiness among African Americans in the surrounding countryside. With dispatch owning to the churches, political clubs, and other institutions of African American life, a major mobilization took place. A major mobilization took place as several hundred African Americans marched in 3 columns toward Vicksburg, Mississippi. Even Peter Crosby feared the consequences and tried to turn some of them back, but it was too late. White supremacists opened fire, and despite some brief standoffs, the African Americans were forced to flee. For another 10 days, some young white participants, joined by reinforcements from across the river in Louisiana, stayed on the warpath. When the smoke cleared, at least 29 African Americans were killed, and a great many more had been wounded and terrorized. The seat of county remained in the hands of the white liners. The seat of county government remained in the hands of white liners. And Peter Crosby, who was briefly held as a prisoner, was compelled to resign yet again as sheriff. Governor Adelbert Ames called the state legislature into a special session, and together they succeeded in convincing President Ulysses S. Grant to send a company of federal troops to quell the disturbances in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and reinstall the African-American sheriff, Peter Crosby. But Sheriff Peter Crosby's days in office were numbered as so too it appeared were those of Republicans over much of the state of Mississippi. For the several-month White Line campaign in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Warren County amounted to a rehearsal for redemption in Mississippi. Torchlight processions, paramilitary drilling, the disruption of Republican political meetings, the harassment of African American workers, the intimidation and assassination of African American leaders, the driving off of local office holders, and the disabling of armed Black resistance, all of which made their appearance in Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1874. All this happened in 1 year. During Reconstruction in Vicksburg, Mississippi. All of this were to come into concerted use in 1875 in counties that previously had safe Republican majorities. This was one of many massacres in U.S. history. Okay, so check this out. Now, this took place during Reconstruction, the Vicksburg Massacre of 1874, December 7, 1874. Now, this is connected to this piece we talked about from time.com, Time Magazine, that I've talked about a number of times here on the show, and I've talked about it in my class as well, the class I teach on Sundays, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. This study right here, and this came out, this article came out January 12, 2022, from Time Magazine, time.com. A new report finds that 45 states, a new report finds that 45 states are failing to teach students about the period that shaped race relations after the Civil War. The period is called Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. Okay, the history of Reconstruction, 45 states out of 50 and the District of Columbia are not teaching the history of Reconstruction properly. In the aftermath of the insurrection, the January 6, 2021 insurrection that I've said before is a continuation of the Civil War and the continuation of Reconstruction and the armed conflict during Reconstruction to end Reconstruction and reverse the rights of African Americans. In the aftermath of the insurrection a year ago at the U.S. Capitol, incited by Benedict Donald, the traitor-in-chief, many leading historians drew parallels between the violence at the U.S. Capitol and the Reconstruction era, the period of political revolution directly following the American Civil War. Eric Foner, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and author of the book Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution, 1863 to 1877, said in an interview with the New Yorker magazine published a week after the January 6th insurrection, he said, quote, "The events we saw January 6, 2021 reminded me very much of the Reconstruction era and the overthrow of Reconstruction, which ends in 1877 with the Compromise of 1877, which was often accompanied or accomplished, I should say, by violent assaults on elected officials." Well, we just read about the Vicksburg Massacre where the duly elected sheriff was forced out of office twice. Scholars say studying the aftermath of the Civil War can help put in context many of the most seminal events in the U.S. in the U.S. in recent years, from the brutal murder of George Floyd by police in 2020 to the voter suppression laws enacted after African-American voters played a big role in helping Joe Biden and Kamala Harris become elected president and vice president in 2020. But despite the timeliness of the era in today's climate, many students in American schools will not get a full education on Reconstruction until they get to college. Despite the timeliness of the era in today's climate, the era of Reconstruction in today's climate, many students in American schools will not get a full education on Reconstruction until they get to college. Most of them are not going to college. In social studies standards, for 45 out of 50 states and the District of Columbia, discussion of Reconstruction is either partial or non-existent. According to historians who reviewed the period, it reviewed how the period is discussed in K through 12 social studies standards for public schools nationwide. In a report produced by the education nonprofit, the Zen Education Project, which we just cited the article from, dealing with the Mississippi, the Vicksburg, Mississippi Massacre of 1874. In a report produced by the education nonprofit, Zen Education Project, nonprofit, the study's authors say they are concerned that American children will grow up uninformed about a critical period of history that helps explain why full racial equality remains unfilled today. Because we're dealing with the culmination of a sequence of historical events that have shaped laws and policies. Coming from Reconstruction, and Reconstruction ending in 1877, the collapse of the Freedmen's Bank in 1874 and 2.9 million deposits of African Americans in the Freedmen's Bank lost. The closing of the Freedmen's Bureau in 1872, the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands in 1872. And then the reversal of African American rights and the rewriting of state constitutions in the 1890s and early 1900s, imposing poll taxes and literacy tests, and state legislatures passing laws starting in 1881 with Tennessee to segregate public accommodations and public transportation. Tennessee segregated railroad cars in 1881, passed in the Tennessee state legislature. They were followed by, now this is after Reconstruction ends. They were followed by, they were followed by Florida in 1887, Mississippi 1888, Texas 1889, Louisiana 1890, Alabama, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Georgia 1891, South Carolina 1898, North Carolina 1899, Virginia 1900, Maryland 1904, and Oklahoma in 1907. Okay, so, and then in Louisiana 1890, that leads to Homer Plessy 1892, who gets arrested. He refuses to move from the whites only railroad car to the colored section. Homer Plessy could pass for white. He said he was 7/8 European, 7/8 white, and 1/8 African. He's from Louisiana, where you had a lot of intermixing taking place. We know Louisiana used to be French territory. Okay. And because of that 1892 incident, that leads to Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896 U.S. Supreme Court case. But then you have 1890, Mississippi, the Mississippi State Convention in 1890, where they rewrite the state constitution to impose poll taxes and literacy tests. They were preceded in 1889 by Florida, which imposed the first poll taxes in the country. And then Mississippi is going to do this in 1890. This is at a time when the majority of the population of Mississippi were African Americans, and the majority of the voters in Mississippi were African Americans. And you have a minority population that is attacking the rights, the voting rights of African Americans. At the Mississippi State Convention in 1890, a new constitution was adopted that included a literacy test and a poll tax for eligible voters. under the new literacy requirement, a potential voter had to be able to read any section of the Mississippi State Constitution or understand any section when read to him, or given a reasonable interpretation, or give a reasonable interpretation of any section. Quote, there is no use to equivocate or lie about the matter, said James Vardaman in 1890. James Vardaman served in the Mississippi legislature at the time of the convention and later became governor of the state of Mississippi. He said, in Mississippi, we have in our constitution legislated against the racial peculiarities of the Negro. When that device fails, we will resort to something else. The impact of the legislation was swift. By 1910, registered voters among African Americans dropped to 15% in Virginia and under 2% in both Alabama and Mississippi, according to historian Donald G. Nyman in his book Promises to Keep African Americans and the Constitutional Order, 1776 to present. There's a good article from history.com called How Jim Crow Era Laws Suppressed the African American Vote for Generations. Okay, so then you have the all-white primaries, like in Texas. Now, that was the Thurgood Marshall argues this case before the U.S. Supreme Court in 1944, Smith versus Allwright. Okay, when literacy tests, poll taxes, and grandfather clauses, Louisiana had the first grandfather clauses in 1898. And the grandfather clauses stated that, okay, prior to 1867, if your grandfather could not vote because they were a slave, that means you can't vote. Okay, if your grandfather could vote prior to 1867, then you could vote. And this was a way to get around, because what they realize is that, okay, so you have some illiterate white men who can't pass the literacy test. So we're going to institute the grandfather clause so we don't eliminate a lot of poor white men who can't pass the literacy test. When literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, and the many other ways to circumvent the 15th Amendment of 1870 did not work to suppress African-American voter turnout, white legislators in several southern states used all-white primaries to all but eliminate African-American voters' presence in the electoral process. After a white election official blocked an African-American man named Lonnie E. Smith the right to vote in the 1940 Texas Democratic primary, the NAACP's Thurgood Marshall and William H. Hastie challenged the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1944, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Smith versus Allwright that the Texas white primary system was unconstitutional. In Texas, for example, the state legislature gave the Democratic Party the authority to set its own rules. The party determined that it was for white voters only, excluding African Americans from its elections and effectively making local electoral politics dominated by one party that upheld Jim Crow laws. That was defeated in the U.S. Supreme Court case of Smith versus Allwright in 1944. All right, so this is just a little sample of the type of information that we deal with in the class I teach on Sundays, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. And we deal with history because we deal with the Reconstruction era, and Reconstruction is critical. Civil War is crucial, of course, but that period, the 1865 to 1877, after the Civil War ends, is a very, very misunderstood period of history. And I want to go to this slide here. Just where is this on Reconstruction? That is, you have things like the Force Acts, and the third of the Force Acts was the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. This, and President Ulysses S. Grant is going to use this in October of 1871 to declare martial law in 9 counties in South Carolina. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, defined citizenship and guaranteed due process and equal protection of the law to all. Vigilante groups like the Ku Klux Klan, however, freely threatened African Americans and their white allies in the South and undermined the Republican Party's plan for Reconstruction. The bill authorized the President of the United States to intervene in the former rebel states that attempted to deny, quote, any person or any class of persons of the equal protection of the laws or of equal privileges or immunities under the laws, end quote. To take action against this newly defined federal crime, the president could suspend habeas corpus, that means having your day in court, having a court trial, deploy the U.S. military, or use other means as he may deem necessary. Okay, this is from history.house.gov, the history section of the U.S. House of Representatives. This deals with the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. This is the third of the fourth force acts, and even though the Ku Klux Klan Act was weakened in, I think it was 1883 by the U.S. Supreme Court, it's still on the books now and is being used in the lawsuit that people like Representative Benny Thompson has against Donald Trump for the January 6th insurrection. If we look at this piece here from NBC News, this deals with how the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act is being used in the latest Trump lawsuit. Representative Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, who's African American, and the NAACP are using the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 in a lawsuit against Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. Okay, now this article is from February 17th, 2021. We talked about this when it came out. Representative Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, and the NAACP are suing Traitor-in-Chief Donald Trump and his longtime ally, Rudy Giuliani, for allegedly conspiring with a pair of hate groups to storm the U.S. Capitol and block the Electoral College count in January, which is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. That bicameral, both chambers, House of Representatives and Senate, that certification of the Electoral College votes is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. So this is their constitutionally bound responsibility that they're carrying out. When they to storm the U.S. Capitol and block the Electoral College count in January, and they're using a 150-year-old law as the basis of the lawsuit. Benny Thompson and the NAACP said that the nation's oldest civil rights organization alleged in the suit obtained by NBC News that Donald Trump, Giuliani, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers used intimidation, harassment, and threats to stop the vote count and cause the January 6th Capitol riot in the process. This, they said, violated the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. Because it's still on the books, even though it was weakened. I guess it tells you something when you can use a Ku Klux Klan law from the 1870s, said Brian Levin, director of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University. It's part of a series of laws enacted after the Civil War. Everything old is unfortunately new again. The statute was first passed following the Civil War to combat the KKK violence and allow African Americans to take action against hate groups who use force, intimidation, or threat to prevent leaders from doing the duties of their office, Brian Levin explained. Particularly, it prohibits people from using violence and conspiracies to keep Congress members from doing their jobs. The law was passed at a time when the Ku Klux Klan was openly, violently terrorizing African Americans and Congress members while seeking to block Reconstruction era reforms for African Americans in the South. They were attacking and killing Black congressmen, white Republicans, all of this. Okay. This is why that law was passed. Okay, read this article here from February 17th, 2021. How the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act is being used in this latest Trump lawsuit. All right, so this is a deep history here, and we see the effects of not understanding this history in these voter suppression bills that are being passed, because the same thing they were doing in the 1890s and early 1900s, rewriting these state constitutions and passing the voter suppression bills, all this stuff, that's what's taking place right now. They were targeting the African American vote in the 1890s and early 1900s. They're doing the same thing now, but they're also targeting the Latino vote, Native Americans, Asian Americans, all of this. This is why we have to understand this. This is why we have to fight back. Elections have consequences. If our vote didn't matter, Republicans wouldn't work so hard to suppress our vote. Okay, you can register for the online course I teach on Sundays, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. That's a 10-week online class that I teach, and we focus on history during that period of time. We do this 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday. As soon as you register, you can watch the class we did this past Sunday. And I do these are actually some slides that from the class. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips, and we start in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase and the Haitian Revolution, because those two events are related. And the Haitian Revolution is going to be one of the things that causes the Louisiana Purchase to take place. And France is trying to raise money. They're going almost bankrupt, fighting during the Haitian Revolution, the 1791 to 1804. The Haitians declare their independence January 1st, 1804. But the U.S. gets 828,000 square miles of land for less than 3 cents an acre. It doubles the territory of the U.S. at the time, but it also increases the need for African slave labor in certain new territory that the U.S. gets where they're going to have slavery. And we know, because of the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 and copies of the cotton gin, this is going to increase the demand for cotton because it reduces the cost of producing cotton. So we deal with this in this class here, and we go through and look at the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Mexican-American War, 1846-1848, Missouri, the Compromise of 1850, Dred Scott case, 1857. We look at the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854, founding of the Republican Party, 1854, presidential election of 1860, November 6, 1860, Lincoln becomes president-elect. South Carolina secedes from the Union 6 weeks after Lincoln becomes president-elect. On December 20th, 1860, they secede from the Union. Civil War starts April 12th, 1861. So we look at the Civil War, Reconstruction, presidential election of 1876, Compromise of 1877. And then we go through and look at history. Reconstruction, Jim Crow era, World War I, World War II, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement. Okay. So we do a PowerPoint presentation. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. We do it live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. We have a text chat so you can ask questions in class also. This class is on sale $60, regularly $130. And even a year from now, if you want to go back and watch the entire course, you can do that. Okay. Next class is Sunday, March 27th. As soon as you register, you can watch the class we did this past Sunday. And then on Saturdays, I teach Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And this class is 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturdays. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We also deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. Classes on sale $60, regular $130. And we have a bundle pack where you can register for both classes for $100. That's a $260 value. You can use this information with your children also. I would say the content is PG-13. All right, it's not overly graphic. I don't do a lot of cursing and things like that. So you can check that out. Also, we're going to post a link here for the bundle pack. Also, as soon as you register, you can start watching content. You can join us in class this weekend. If you've taken any of my online classes in the past, email me at ahnshow@africanhistorynetwork.com. Email me at ahnshow@africanhistorynetwork.com. You'll get a 50% discount on the bundle pack. Okay. Email me at ahnshow@africanhistorynetwork.com. So we have a special discount for returning students. All right. Also, the Power in One conference, Power in Unity conference, is taking place in Detroit, April 30th and March 1st. Okay, April 30th and April 30th and May 1st. Saturday, April 30th, Sunday, May 1st, 2022, in Detroit. And this is organized by Brother Taki Grant and Sister Felicia. And this is the Hapi Presents, the Hapi Tour and the Hapi Film, One Africa, Power in Unity Conference. Saturday, April 30th, Sunday, May 1st at the Doubletree Hotel. I'll be there also. I live right near the Doubletree here in downtown Detroit. So they're going to have a ton of African Center speakers. Some of my teachers, Professor James Small, Dr. Linda Jeffries, they're speaking. Dr. Jeffries' wife, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, is speaking also. You have Dr. Maulana Karenga. You have Asar Imhotep, Dr. Chike Akua, my friend Dr. Chike Akua. You have Dr. Malefi Keti Asante, chair of the Afro-American Studies Department at Temple University. You have Infodushi Jehutimans, who we've had on the show before. So this is a 2-day conference. Tickets are available. We're going to post the link here. We'll get this up on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, as well. And let me go over this quickly here. So this is come join us live in Detroit. Now you can also register for the live stream and watch it live around the world. Hapi, in association with Arquette Tours, is hosting the inaugural One Africa Power in Unity 2-day conference in Detroit, Michigan. You will hear enlightening lectures from renowned scholars. So the ticket information is here. You can register for this today. The One Africa conference theme illustrates that all African cultures and peoples are linked together, either through ethnicity, language, arts, or culture. Presenters will unpack the historical connectivity and confluence of African people moved throughout the world. The conference will also feature the essence of One Africa and how it relates to the power in unity, which is at the core of our principles in the Hapi movement. And Hapi is the shirt I have on. That's the documentary Hapi, the role of African culture and the development, the role of economics in the development of civilization. It deals with African history, African culture, and economics in African culture, African civilizations also. The very symbol of Hapi itself speaks to the power of unity. Hapi is one of the original names for the Nile River. Conference attendees will experience stimulating and interactive lectures from multiple lenses of study. The conference will take place on Saturday, April 30th, 2022, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sunday, May 1st, 2022, 12 noon to 4 p.m. Okay. So check this out. We posted the link here, and we'll get this up on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com also. All right, look, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. We'll